Have you ever heard of a man who led a revolution, built a nation, and then walked away from power? Sounds impossible, right? In a world full of men who craved the throne, one man decided to destroy it, and his name was George Washington. But his story isn't just about battles and politics, it's about character, sacrifice, and leadership when the world was falling apart. So, let's go back to the very beginning, before the fame, before the title father of his country, to a time when George Washington was just a man, standing in the shadow of an empire. Washington was born in 1732 in Virginia, a colony under the mighty British Crown. Back then, being British was a badge of pride. The colonies weren't talking about independence, they were just trying to survive, to farm, to trade, to live under the red, white, and blue of the Union Jack. Washington was the son of a modest planter, not a nobleman, not an elite. He didn't have the polished education of Europe's aristocrats. What he had was grit, the kind of quiet determination that burns deep in the heart of someone who refuses to be ordinary. From a young age, George learned the art of patience, watching, listening, enduring. He worked as a surveyor, walking miles of wilderness, mapping lands no one dared to cross. It was lonely, dangerous work. But that's where he learned something the world would later see in his leadership: self-control. Out there, in the silence of the forests, Washington learned that the greatest battles are not fought with muskets, but with the mind. But destiny doesn't knock, it roars. And for George Washington, that roar came from the sound of war drums. When the French and Indian War broke out in the 1750s, young Washington saw his chance to prove himself. He joined the British forces as a provincial officer. But he quickly realized the British generals didn't see him as an equal. To them, he was just another colonial. Still, Washington led men through rain, hunger, and defeat. At Fort Necessity, he tasted humiliation. His first major command ended in surrender. But instead of quitting, Washington wrote in his diary that he had learned more from that loss than any victory could teach him. That's something to think about. How many people today crumble after failure? Washington didn't. He studied his mistakes. He learned to lead through example, not fear. And that would later make him the kind of leader soldiers would follow barefoot through snow. Fast forward 20 years, the colonies are growing restless. Britain keeps taxing them without giving them a voice in Parliament, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, one after another. The Boston Tea Party happens, protests spread. People begin whispering the unthinkable word: independence. But whispers don't win wars. The colonies needed a leader. When the Continental Congress met in 1775, Washington walked in wearing his old military uniform. No one told him to. He wore it as a statement: I'm ready to fight. That silent move spoke louder than 100 speeches. He was soon chosen as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. But here's the truth most people don't know: Washington didn't want the job. He knew the odds. 13 colonies, divided and poor, against the world's greatest military power. But when duty called, Washington said yes. And that one yes changed history. When Washington took command of the ragtag army outside Boston, what he saw was chaos: farmers with rifles, no training, no discipline, no supplies. The British soldiers looked like an unstoppable machine. Washington's men looked like a mob. But that's where his genius showed. He didn't rely on luck, he relied on character. He instilled discipline, built trust, and inspired belief. Remember, he told his men, we are fighting not for land, but for liberty. But the early years were brutal. Washington's army lost more battles than they won. New York fell. Philadelphia was taken. Men deserted. The Congress doubted him. There were whispers, maybe Washington wasn't the right man. Some wanted to replace him. But he never lashed out, never blamed anyone. He wrote in one letter, perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages. That's the kind of faith only a real leader carries, the belief that even when everything is burning, you hold the torch steady. Then came the winter of 1777, Valley Forge. Snow, starvation, disease. 6 months of misery. Soldiers wrapped their feet in rags because they had no shoes. You could trace their march by the blood they left in the snow. Washington could have left, no one would have blamed him. But he stayed. Every morning, he rode through the camp, silent, steady. The sight of him gave men hope when hope was all they had left. One soldier later wrote, "He looked at us like a father looks at his sons." That's where Washington's true leadership shined, not in victory, but in suffering. When people talk about leadership today, they think of power, followers, titles. Washington showed that real leadership is service. He wasn't leading for himself, he was leading for something bigger. Then, Christmas night, 1776, the turning point, Washington made the boldest move of the war. His army, half-starved and freezing, crossed the icy Delaware River to surprise the Hessian troops at Trenton. No one expected it. It was madness, but Washington believed the attack succeeded for the first time. The American cause had real hope, and the legend of George Washington began. Years of blood and sacrifice followed, battles won, battles lost, but Washington never gave up. He learned patience, strategy, and when to retreat. He turned ordinary men into patriots. And after 8 long years, in 1781, the impossible happened at Yorktown. The British surrendered, the war was over, the colonies had won their independence. But here's where the story gets truly unbelievable. Because what Washington did next shocked the world. He didn't seize power. He didn't crown himself king, though people would have followed him if he did. Instead, he resigned. He handed back his sword to Congress and went home. The most powerful man in America walked away. King George III, hearing this, said in disbelief, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world," and he did. For a few years, Washington lived quietly on his farm at Mount Vernon. He wanted nothing more than peace. But the country he had fought for was falling apart. The Articles of Confederation were weak. States were divided. There was no unity. The people turned to the one man everyone still trusted, George Washington. Reluctantly, he came back, presided over the Constitutional Convention, and helped shape what would become the United States Constitution. And when the time came to elect the first president, it wasn't even a contest, everyone voted for Washington. But here's the part most people forget, being the first president wasn't easy. There was no example to follow, no roadmap. Every decision he made would set a precedent for generations. He was careful, thoughtful, always asking, "What's best for the country, not for me?" He refused to be called Your Majesty. He chose Mr. President, that simple choice defined American democracy. He built a government from scratch, established the cabinet, the judiciary, the treasury. He balanced the rivalries between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, men who could barely stand each other. He stayed neutral in foreign wars. He made mistakes but owned up to them. And after 2 terms, when people begged him to stay, he refused. He said, "The people must learn to govern themselves." Once again, he walked away from power. Think about that. Twice in his life, George Washington had absolute authority as a general and as a president, and twice, he gave it up voluntarily. That's what made him different. He understood that true leadership isn't about holding power, it's about knowing when to let it go. Now, let's pause for a second. What does Washington's story mean for us today? We live in a world where everyone wants to be seen, to be praised, to be powerful. But Washington reminds us that real greatness is quiet. It's about doing the right thing when no one's clapping. It's about humility, discipline, and service. He didn't fight for fame, he fought for freedom. He didn't lead for ego, he led for duty. And maybe that's the biggest lesson from his life. Leadership starts with character. Washington was not perfect. He made mistakes, faced doubts, had failures, but he kept his integrity. When the world around him demanded compromise, he stood firm. When people begged him to be a king, he chose to be a citizen. When power tempted him, he walked away. Let me tell you something powerful. At the end of his presidency, Washington wrote a farewell address, not to boast, but to warn. He told Americans to avoid political divisions, to stay united, to put country above party. His words were not for his time, they were for all time. George Washington died in 1799, quietly at Mount Vernon, surrounded by his loved ones. But his legacy, his spirit, became the heartbeat of America. Monuments may crumble, coins may fade, but the idea he lived for, that freedom requires character, will never die. So next time you see his face on a dollar bill, don't just see a founder, see the man who could have been king, but chose to be free. Because here's the truth, Washington didn't just build a nation. He built an example. And that example still whispers to every generation, be the kind of leader who serves, not rules. Be the kind of person who leads by example, not by force. Be the kind of American who fights for others, not yourself. And that, my friends, is the real story of George Washington's founding leadership, the story of a man who believed that liberty was worth everything, even his own power. Moral takeaway: true leadership isn't about titles or authority. It's about character, humility, and courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. George Washington taught us that greatness is not measured by how much power you hold, but by how willingly you give it up for something greater than yourself. If this story moved you, if it made you see George Washington in a new light, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a little inspiration today, and comment below what leadership means to you. And of course, subscribe for more real stories that shaped our world, because history isn't just about the past, it's about how we live today.